Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. I'm very excited to be with you this morning. I'm going to start with a few slides, and then we're going to get into interacting with the sapiens. So if you've read our documents, I hope some of you have read our Synthetic Intelligence 101 document, you'll know that at New Sapiens, we don't think that intelligence, that is the word intelligence, should mean one thing when applied to humans and another thing when applied to machines. And we, in our document, we give intelligence a precise definition that I don't want to go into it now, but in fact, humans, even without a precise definition, we recognize each other as intelligent beings, very largely driven by our ability to communicate and share ideas with one another via our language. So what we're going to do today, the objectives of this session is that we're going to use our MELD integrated development environment. This is the development environment that we use to put knowledge curated that comes from our own minds. Initially, we were working on common sense knowledge, but eventually any kind of expert knowledge. And through a toolkit, we can put it into the synthetic form of knowledge that the Sapient program can comprehend and convert it into knowledge that functions inside the Sapient's mind in the same sense. And then to prove to you that this isn't one of those made-up demos, we're going to go under the hood and look at the actual information structures or data structures that the program creates in its own memory. So it's kind of interesting. It's like being able to talk to someone and then open up their mind and see what's really going on inside their head. So that's quite unique. And after that, I'm going to spend a little time talking about the implications of this technology from the standpoint of its scalability, which how much effort we have to put in to get a given language as compared to other technologies. And then the issue of trust. How do you trust a machine? Especially how do you trust an intelligent machine if you believe it is intelligent? So what are the hallmarks of language comprehension that humans key in on each other and understand that, yeah, that he understands, or that's part of the process? We're going to demonstrate 6 different functions of, I might say, language comprehension, but in some sense it's comprehension in the broader sense, comprehension of the world. First is what we call cognitive learning through language, and that's when I tell you a new idea and you understand me. So that's an idea that came in your head from me, or vice versa, through language. That's different than machine learning in the sense of what the chatbots do. That's neural learning, and that's, through millions of iterations, you can get a program to recognize an image of a bicycle. But that's not cognitive learning. That's not the kind of learning we do when we go to school. That's at a lower neural level. Humans do learn that way, of course. That's how we learn language and how we learn how to ride bikes. But cognitive learning is something quite different. Next, another critique or a fundamental thing that people say about previous sentence AI, they don't have common sense. Well, that's really because they don't have bona fide knowledge of the world. And common sense is really kind of common knowledge. Explaining reasoning, that's another thing. Anybody talks about LLMs and chatbots, they can't tell you why they say what they say. The internal operation is opaque. We talked about learning through language, but a lot of the knowledge we get is reasoning about what we already know. And a very key example of that is, how do you infer the meaning of an unknown word by its use in a sentence? You have to think about that, and there's a reasoning process. And like humans, sapiens do that. Finally, not finally, but next to the last, we have understanding the contextual meaning of language. We all know, maybe not aware of it, but one word sometimes means, depending on the context, depending on how you use it with other words, means something entirely different. Entirely different. That's been a real problem with conventional approaches to AI and language. In fact, it's been a showstopper. And even maybe more subtle is to distinguish between perceptions and feelings and thoughts. These kinds of concepts are not, one is not equivalent to the other. And they have huge implications for really understanding what a person said, if you can do that. Again, grammar and language do not give us any clues about these distinctions. All right. Now I'm going to, am I sharing just the window or the screen? No, it looks good, I guess. I apologize for the small font. This is a fairly new application. It's written in Swift UI, Apple's UI language, and it doesn't at this point give us much capability to dynamically change the font. So I will read to you what's on the screen, but it's embedded in terms of these. This is the Sapiens talking to me. This is me talking to, well, the other way. Yeah, this is the blue is me talking to the Sapiens. The gray is the Sapiens talking back to me. And we see we started a conversation here, and I said I told her that Lyrica was a medication. And then I said I was taking my Lyrica now. And then I give it just another kind of general kind of common sense sentence. The parking permit is in the car in the driver's side door pocket. That's a kind of use cases that's very obvious and very near term for something that can actually understand what you mean and that has a perfect memory. But to get on with the language demonstrations, I'm going to start by asking, just going back and saying, where's the parking permit? This is kind of the first test of, in a real conversational entity, you tell it something and it doesn't always, in fact, it usually doesn't require a response. And that's why you see over here, there goes into medication. Oh, okay, I see, I'm taking my American. Now, all right. So what's it really doing with it? Well, if you can ask a question about it, then you get an answer back. Where's the parking permit? It is amid the car, amid the side door pocket, driver pocket. It's not talking, that's kind of amusing in that in our model, somebody put in the words amid and amid as a synonym to in, which it is, but it's an archaic use. So eventually we'll add some additional information for the sake, don't use this word unless you're in a given context that would be appropriate. But it's intelligible and it's correct. It is in the car, in the side driver door pocket. Now let's give it a little story to move things along here. I'm going to tell it I have a story for it, and in fact, it's just a few sentences. But I don't want it to stop and say, "Okay, hi, yes, I got it," between each sentence. And I'm going to give it some information that uses a number of words that I know it doesn't know what they mean because I actually double checked in the model. It doesn't know what I inputted here was cetaceans are large carnivorous aquatic mammals. Dolphins are beautiful small cetaceans. Pelorus Jack was a very smart dolphin that lived in New Zealand a century ago. Jack led ships through the Cook Strait. So just a little story, but it doesn't know what a cetacean is. It doesn't know what a dolphin is. And it never heard of Jack Pelorus before. Now, as it's going through this, and it takes a little time, especially for the longer sentences, because it's thinking. What does this mean? What does each word, do I have a reference for each word? For those words that it doesn't have a reference for, it creates an object structure in the overall model table structure as kind of a placeholder. And then it tries to guess a reason what it might be. Okay. Now, if I was in what we call the pedagogic mode, and I gave it just one sentence like that, cetaceans are large. Well, actually, I define what it is right there. It doesn't have to do any inferencing. But in this case, so I gave it a class, cetaceans, which is subclass of mammal. I gave it dolphins, which is subclass of cetaceans. I gave it an instance of a class, which is a particular dolphin with a proper noun name, and gave it a little information about that. And if you see at the bottom here, you probably can't see these, but as each sentence is processed by the thing, it puts a representation of that out there with, repeats that sentence. And this is a clickable link. And when I click on that link, I can go into the Sapiens mind and see what it's thinking about and what it actually did to create that. And again, I'm using the word mind, not really in a metaphorical sense. If what a mind is something that can process and think, and thinking is defined as something that can comprehend language and process knowledge and extend its knowledge to the world, then the Sapiens is truly thinking right now. Actually, it's finished thinking right now. So again, let's ask a little question to see if we can get a hint as to the internal comprehension that's going on here. So I'm going to ask a technical question, and I'm going to ask it about Jack. Was Jack endothermic? Well, that's a pretty technical question. And keep in mind, until I just typed it in here or dropped it in here, it didn't know what, it did never heard of Jack before. It never heard of a dolphin before. It never heard of a cetacean before. So I mentioned that the longer sentences take a little bit longer processing time. If I mentioned that we haven't optimized it for performance, it'll be a lot faster by the time we get this thing to a product down the road a ways. Should be no different in talking to a person. But some questions are harder than others. And again, in this case, we see these three little dots over there. That is an indication that it's processing my question. It is thinking about it. And in the process, did it understand the question? In the process of building the graphs for understanding the question, it builds the graph, including the answer of the question. If it knows it. If it can't find the answer, if through traversing the model to find the information that relates to how it understood the word to be, it will come out and say, I don't know. Interesting, chatbots never say they don't know. They know everything according to that. They always will give you an answer that sounds good. But in this case, this is very precise. Jack is endothermic because it's a dolphin, and dolphins are endothermic. And dolphins are cetaceans. Cetaceans are mammals, and mammals are endothermic. So it understood, the software understood these connections. So actually, it knows a ton about Jack because it knows everything it knows about mammals. It knows everything it knows about cetaceans, which isn't a whole lot, and dolphins, which isn't a whole lot. But it also knows about what mammals are. Animals are organisms, and organisms are physical objects. And all those properties now are known about Jack in a very compact, and that knowledge is reusable. We can continue to talk about Jack and get more and more information about Jack, as well in a more broader sense about the classes of cetaceans and dolphins. Okay, so what about common sense? Well, let's suppose, I mean, the Sapiens doesn't know a lot about the world. It's only 2 minutes old, but even a young child, but 2 or 3 years old. What if I said, well, what makes Jack so smart? How can he get the lead chips through the Cook Strait? Well, he must read the nautical charts. And the 4-year-old might say, well, okay. But let's see what Helen, who's, I guess she's maybe almost 20 minutes old now, but she was born with some degree of knowledge about the common sense world. And again, this one takes a little thought process because it's seeing if things fit together. I have a problem with what you said. Dolphins can't read. Explain yourself. Why not? Only persons can read. Again, it doesn't talk exactly like an educated person, but it's entirely intelligible. And at this point, we really don't care. It's very literal-minded, clearly. Only persons can read. So this is an example, really, what we call this cognitive chemistry. If you think about each idea, and there are about 4,000 different concepts in the model today, which are all connected together in sundry ways. When it processes the statement, Jack must have read the nautical charts. It looks at Jack and says, I got a dolphin here. It looks at reading, and that's an action. It can be formed by certain things on certain things. If you took that reading, and I wish I had time to go into the model and show you the actual structures, how we edited them and put them in the form, and they get turned into this graph structure. I could show you the graph structures. I could show you the form we put it in, and you could see the properties of reading. And it says that the things you read are recorded information, like text, and the things that can read are people. And so it couldn't put it together. The atoms, just like some atoms, you can't, a sodium atom connects with a chloride atom very readily, but argon can't combine with neon or any other things. You just can't put them together. That's cognitive chemistry, and it works in the same way here with ideas. Now, let's go the other way. What can we infer? What do we don't know? So one of the things it didn't know about, I know, and the model didn't know about with respect to words, didn't have cetaceans or dolphins. It also doesn't have the word tenders. So in this nautical context, if I said to you what a tender is, and I said people ride tenders to shore, you would, if you've never heard of tenders, a person would try to guess what that might be. So let's ask it what it did with that. What is a tender? Tenders are possibly horses. They are probably vehicles. By the way, it has a lot of different patterns you can answer back in that all mean more or less the same thing. But in this case, this is interesting. It's a little amusing, actually. But if I went in, where did this information come from? Well, it comes from the same specification on actions that we just used in the case of the action of reading to understand that Jack couldn't have read nautical charts. But it's kind of going the other way. And that is, if you go into the model and looked at the definition for riding, it would have a property on it, which called the object, which means what can you do this action to? And what it points to today in the model as it's going thing, it points to two things, vehicles and horses. And on those pointers, we have other pointers which specify the frequency or likelihood that this is the case. So in this case, it says probably vehicles, possibly horses. As we build a more sophisticated model, we'll replace horses with more general knowledge. We'll create a set probably called riding animals, and we'll put in there horses, and we'll put some information about where, North America probably, or in India probably an elephant. And so it'll be more sophisticated. But already it made the correct inference. But now it knows that now if it starts getting other information about tenders, or we use more sentences about tenders, it may be able to realize, oh, it's in fact a boat. And as we add more contextual information, for instance, we've already established a kind of nautical context here. It may be able to go directly to the inference that is probably a boat. In fact, eventually we'll be able to do that. So that's, again, extending the knowledge of the world through reasoning about what you already have. All right, what about feelings and subjective impressions and all that good stuff? So let's go back and say, what's a dolphin? And again, cognitive chemistry is not necessarily subtle. It could be quite sophisticated and intricate as you extend the knowledge of the model. What is a dolphin? They are small cetaceans. You think they are beautiful. Well, that's interesting because the grammar, which beautiful is an adjective, is the same as small. And most people, we don't bother with that. We just we just think they're beautiful, as though that kind of feature was in fact a feature, a property of the thing itself. So Jack Palloris is a dolphin. You think Jack Palloris is smart. A variation on the theme. That's not an emotion this time, but the idea of smart is categorized, and we categorize all these concepts on 4 or 5 separate categorizations and dimensions, all of which have profound significance for how the cognitive chemistry works. So in this case, smart is known to be an intellectual assessment by an individual. So again, it's going to be related back to me. Now, again, all of this dialogue could have been generated, by a good Python programmer in about an hour or two. And, with just if the input says people write tenders to shore, then, and the input is what is a tender, output says tenders are possibly horses, they're probably vehicles. You could do all that with Python. And in fact, the initial chatbots were really nothing more than that. And even then they created, in some cases, a stunning illusion of intelligence, like Joseph Weizenbaum's first ELIZA, which wasn't much more sophisticated than a Python program with inputs and outputs. And yet people thought it was intelligence. And so, in fact, it was creating quite a stir. But now we have the term ELIZA effect to describe the phenomenon of people anthropomorphizing simple computer programs, which really don't have any of those characteristics. In this case, we contend that they do have those characteristics. And chatbots, of course, do not. So I'm going to go down. Let's look at an example here. Let's go down and say, okay, dolphins are beautiful small cetaceans. So the first thing, we generate all this internal structure. Here is the input text. It's the actual dolphins are beautiful small cetaceans. Here is the grammatical parse, which gives the pure parts of speech and the linguistic relationship between each word in the sentence. And then we build this input graph, which again, it's a graph structure in the structure of the data structure of a graph that we use for everything internally. But it's really a graph. It's really an internal instruction which reflects what the person said, but we have to go another step, which we have to take that graph structure. We have to reason about it. The code has to process that, look at the grammatical relationships, look more importantly, but then go into the semantic relationships, which the words relate back to an internal model element in the thing, such as the cetaceans creates a new thing and creates a graph, not of what the person said, but of what it actually means in terms of. So we're looking inside of Helen's mind here. And this is the structure that was generated. And only a few of them are tagged. These are just identifiers on there. If I expanded the tag on this one, it's a little information that's printed out in English for the sake of the debugger or the modeler. You actually see there is an identifier here, an English word at max small. But these aren't words, and there aren't linguistic relationships. These relationships are epistemological. That is, they talk about how the world works together. So we have a generated class substance here that is, that's the dolphin. No, that is, dolphins, that's a new class. It's a subclass over here. That would probably be subclass if I broke it down. Cetacean, which is also just recently generated. And we have small, a property that's attached to the recently generated class, which is dolphin. And also we have beauty pointing at it. But let's expand beauty. Now it gets pretty complicated pretty fast because, again, there's all these connections. And so here's generated beauty, but now we've got more information. It is actually of type of the class, which is in the model. Now you see an English word beauty, that's the class that somebody wrote. And it's a species property. What that means is that this is a defining thing for that concept. But over here, we have connected to that. This diamond shape means it's an instance. The round ones are classes. The squares are just collections or sets. And the diamonds are particular instances. For instance, it learned the instance of the dolphin Dolores Jack, and we went into that sentence. You would find that diamond shape on Jack. So, but what person is this? Let's expand this object. Okay, we have a generated person connected to beauty. This knows some other things about me. Because if I went into, there's a generated name. If we expand that, you would eventually find my first and last name. But it's getting pretty crowded in here. Oh yeah, there we are, Cruse. By the way, though, if you look at the person here, you see I also possess some things like medications and does it think I own the car? I don't think so. But I have my metformin is over there. So that's me. So all of this structure gets created. It's all integrated into the model that's created through these tools of 4,000 different or so, common sense things, but also more importantly, underlying the very special, what we call the atoms of thought, which are really what control how the chemistry and control. So that's what's going on in a sapiens mind right now. And I'm sorry we don't have time for questions and supply right now, but we'll have time for, we're making sure we have time for questions at the end. And I think we're doing pretty good on time right now. So I'm going to go back to my slides here. And real quickly, I think we made a pretty case that we went through these things. Now, how big was this and how much time and where do we go from here? Again, let's talk about the scalability. Scalability is really been the thing that has plagued all approaches to artificial intelligence from the very beginning. And I spent several years early on with what was the big deal AI at the time, which is now called symbolic AI. It's considered the first wave of AI. And it was all about trying to capture an expert's knowledge into a computer by individually programming rules, a reasoning process, one rule, one thought, one inference at a time. And I actually built one expert system to analyze telemetry from the Hubble Space Telescope, maybe 50 different telemetry points. And it took, a few months to build the thing, but in the end, it only had a few hundred rules, and maybe it did it right. It got the right answers, but you couldn't, 50 telemetry points in a couple of months of effort doesn't scale when you have 4,000 telemetry points. But what's worse is if you start making rules, inferred other rules, and they infer other rules, you got into what's called a combinatorial explosion. Suddenly you had thousands of different rules and they were flying all over the place, and the whole thing would kind of break down. And that's what happened to expert systems. They didn't scale. Nobody could build any real practical applications other than 50 or 60 rules. And so they weren't a commercial success. And like today's AI, it was hyped and people had invested a lot of money and people lost a lot of money, and AI got a bad reputation. You couldn't even use the term. We had something called the AI winter. So that happened to expert systems. But artificial neural networks, which are the fundamental technology underlying machine learning and the LLM, have an even worse inherent scalable problem, because each individual neuron has to connect to other neurons, but to get a bigger model, to train it on more data, you have to have more and more neurons, and those interrelations have to interrelate again and again until you get a logarithmic increase in the number of interconnections between neurons. And that means you need bigger and bigger computers and more data. And where are we today? So ChatGPT, I was there, when it came, I was keenly interested in ChatGPT 2, which was quite interesting. ChatGPT 3 was an amazing improvement in ChatGPT 2, but they did a couple of orders of magnitude more data and more training time and more energy uses to produce ChatGPT 3. But it was an amazing improvement. Then they had ChatGPT 3.5 with even more data, even more energy, even more computer time. Not so big an improvement. ChatGPT 4, hardly noticeable improvement. It's getting worse. They're on the flat part of the curve of data and data sets and processing power and energy. They're already on the flat part of the curve. Probably many are starting to predict, one of them, that we're not going to see any huge improvement. And for all the efforts out there right now, which I call all the craziness out there, they're trying to cover, the big tech companies are trying to cover the planet with data centers and build nuclear power plants to drive them. And so what? Is it really going to be transformative? We're not getting the productivity that they said already. Less and less companies are trying to deploy. You had to do it, it was the thing. Everybody had to rush to LLMs and at least give them lip service for a while. But so let's go back here. Everything you saw today, we had 3,600 classes, 500 sets, 20,000 instances, but most of those instances were imported like from databases, like proper name. Most of it's proper names and proper name places, things like that. The actual case of instances really that were important are ones like Flores Jack, that you tell it about something that you are particularly interested in, or your particular schedule, or your particular medication. Those are instances, those diamonds on the vector graph shape. So we really don't have a relatively small number there. And then we have the connectivity. We actually have a lot of those connections between those 4,000 nodes, 100,000 of them. And then we have 50,000 connections that are connections between connections, which is a departure from classical graph in mathematics, but we've enhanced it. But maybe the most significant thing at all here is microsteps are 2,200. That's like the lines of code, not the comments or white space, but the actual lines of code that execute and do something. That's not a huge program. And it's compact because the data that the program reasons about is completely separate in the model. And that's where all the complexity is. But it itself is simplified and made compact by the fact that we use the same fundamental building blocks to build any idea of any level of sophistication. And there's not that many of them. Maybe actually the number of what we call the atoms of thought is at the same order of magnitude as material atoms, maybe over 100. And each one of those edges, which is also a fundamental building block, has very specific meanings to the code. The code can handle them the same connectors all the time. It's just reasoning about putting this together, connecting that together. The whole thing is building a jigsaw puzzle. And yet, the power of it is pretty awesome. Now, people say, where are we today? And, I just, that's cute what you just showed me. I like that. I get that it's not made up with input and output statements, but it's really doing that kind of logic reasoning, really building a non-symbolic information structure in a computer memory that can be generated from natural language and converted back to natural language through articulation. I see that we're really doing that. Well, when can I get mine? And when can I sit and be able to talk to it and see if I can use it to help me remember when I took my medications? Well, okay, so right now, I sometimes tell people that this model today is like building the big structure for a skyscraper with 40,000 rooms, but we have to put the furniture in each room and the plumbing and the heating electrical, and that's where these edges and we'll more nodes. So it can really reason across everyday situations and truly be of helpful to you. Well, the key thing to keep in mind that what we've built today, a lot of it, of course, over the past 5 years, we were doing the cognitive core, we were doing the R&D, we were doing the basic structure and figuring it out, and we've made huge progress. But during that time, we didn't have more than 2 or 3 full-time engineers working on this stuff. Well, I'm happy to tell you that this week, or next week, we are graduating a class of synthetic intelligence engineers, 16 new people. Some have been with us as interns previously, and so, but this is going to allow us to tackle that model. We know what to build, we know how to build it out, we know how to populate it, and we anticipate rapid progress to getting to the point initially where we can do, a real beta test where people can interact with the thing and say, yeah, I like this is working for me, or it needs this, or it needs that, or to give some feedback, but just tell us how close we're getting to the point where we can release it as a product, as the companion sapiens. And also the fact that when you can take, the biggest challenge we've had, the technology has gone from strength to strength. The biggest problem we've had is to raise money, because we've had to raise money from individual angel investors, or we've had some success with crowdfunding, but that's a hard way to go. And we have to do that because we're so contrarian to what everybody else is doing. There's this huge investment hysterical bubble about LLMs, and it's going to burst. But in the meantime, we have to work really hard to keep that money. And now we have to maintain our expanded staff. And so we need these campaigns to go well, and we need your investment. I want to make one more point, and then we'll talk, and we'll open to questions. I want to talk about AI and trust. this has been an issue that is becoming more and more to the forefront of people's minds. But in fact, it's not just AI. I read a very fascinating article. This was very timely. Just read it yesterday in the Free Press. Get to give you the link to it. It's called The Collapse of the Knowledge System. And this keen observer of the human condition and of society named Ted Goya has advanced the thesis, and with the evidence, he points out that scientific studies aren't replicating like they used to. What I mean by that, a scientific study would be done, and then they would publish it, and other people would go out and would replicate the steps in the experiment and prove and either get the same results or not. And that used to be a very high correlation that happened, way up there, 90%. You know what the correlation now in scientific study replication? It's way down about 40%, which means people are sloppy. Okay, they're not doing replication correctly, where the original study wasn't done precisely. That's a huge concern, because scientific studies used to be our ground truth, about things like medications. He points out that public distrust of experts has reached an intensity never seen before. He said people still believe in expert plumbers and expert carpenters, but general experts beyond that, they're increasingly skeptical. Plagiarism is being exposed all over the place, and everybody just taking it for granted. Okay, yeah, big deal. Of course, we have the issue that everything comes out of an LLM could, in one sense, be considered plagiarism because it didn't have the knowledge it's coming up with, and that knowledge isn't real knowledge because it's an amalgamation of other thoughts and knowledge in other people's brains who talked about it, wrote about it, and then it processed the language. But plagiarism is much more common, and people are just kind of shrugging about it. And of course, we have AI. AI, expert systems, LLMs, being used for search, being used to generate all kinds of documents. It's being imposed on us everywhere, in the schools, on the web. Google's making us, use it. Microsoft is making us use it. It's everywhere. But everybody knows it comes out with stuff that's wrong. And they call it hallucinations. But of course, it's not hallucinations. That's anthropomorphic. There's a reason they call it hallucinations, because if it was an hallucination, that's something that humans are prone to. And that when a human hallucinates, it's a malfunction. And if it's a malfunction, maybe you can correct it. So if LLMs have hallucinations, maybe you can fix it. And they've been saying they can fix it all along, but it doesn't get better, and they can't fix it. And they can't because it's inherent to the process, because it doesn't have any notion of accuracy or precision or knowledge at all. It's just coming up with language that sounds like an answer to the question based on the way other answers to the questions or similar questions that it found in its training set. So it will always be there. And this is a real concern. Now, synthetic knowledge, and I want you to grasp this, is a very different approach. I got to wrap this up because we're running out of time. But synthetic knowledge is carefully created from the new human mind. Think about it. Think about what it entails here. Suppose you had one perfect student, not a million students, that you wanted to teach chemistry to. And that one student had a mind of unlimited capacity and a perfect memory. And let's say you gathered the finest teachers, professors, authorities, texts, books, experiments about chemistry from every source in the world, and you sat down with these experts and they put their heads together and they worked at getting the fundamental concepts and the fundamental relationships of chemistry. And they had a way to impart them to this perfect student, not with glossy, messy English, but in this very precise way. We can do that. That's what we have. That's what our technology allows us to do. And so we can be the antidote to this collapse of the knowledge system. We can put knowledge coming from the most proven and widely validated knowledge from the best sources, and eventually through Sapience make it available to everybody in the palm of their hand who has access to a screen. And it will work because it is validated. And so people will use it and it will work and they will get good results in their decisions. And it's respect will grow, and we will restore our confidence in the knowledge that our society has created. So when you invest in new sapiens, you're not just really investing, yeah, it's investing like investing in Microsoft when it was just, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, or, Joe's and Jobs and Wozniak. You have the chance here to really see it grow and have your investment grow without limit. But you're really doing something really important. You may, in a sense, be saving the world. Thank you. I think we're ready for questions, Ayush.
Fantastic. Everybody, if you can put your questions in the chat box below, we'd love to answer them right now. Bryant, we do already have one question from Mr. Al Underbrink. He says, I'm an old AI weenie too, and also old enough to remember the videotape recording battle between Betamax and VHS.
Yes.
While Betamax was a superior technology, VHS won out anyway. So while synthetic intelligence should win out over conventional AI like ChatGPT and large language models, how confident are we that it will win out?
Well, I hate to say 100% confident because that sounds too cocky. But in fact, I have in my mind, in my intellect, I can't find any sense at all that we won't be able to disrupt and knock LLMs right off the planet. Why? Because they're already beginning to collapse. The cracks are already there. The models are getting flat. Hallucinations aren't getting better. And now, chatbots like OpenAI claims that ChatGPT is now generating 100 billion words a day. And where is most of that going? It's going on the internet. And now they're going to train their next generation models on stuff that came out of the last generation models. And they're heading for something called. So more things which sound good without being correct are going to be used to train bigger models with more energy. And it's called model collapse. And here's the other other side of the coin. We see all this money go in, but people have been recognizing for some time that, whoa, look at these companies that are being funded with huge valuations to do an LLM wrapper. There was a great article, we could do the thing, linked to that just last week, in which someone, or the week before, someone said 99% of all these AI startups doing LLM wrappers will be gone within a year or two. Why? First of all, because they're not answering the mail. It doesn't really work that well. Okay? It doesn't really work that well as a child psychologist. It doesn't really work that well as a medical diagnostic tool. It doesn't really work that well as a search engine if you bother to actually go back and give it some validation. In fact, another study said that when they put experts down and said, ask it questions that you know the answer to, and they put it to all the different chatbots, and you know what the accuracy was? 40%. It was wrong 60% of the time for chatbots. VHS tapes worked. They worked fine. I know Betamax was better, but the VHS tapes answered the mail. They did it. So it wasn't a case of something slightly better from something worse, and the slightly worse one won because of whatever reason, marketing. We have a technology that doesn't work compared to a technology that does work. So not worried about it. Just not worried about it.
Speaking of another thing, Bryant, what's your level of conviction that there are no competitors with similar software right on our tail? And let's raise the question, what happens if big tech want to use our technology as well?
Well, that's two questions. Okay. The first question is, and I used to wonder, because to me, it seemed like putting knowledge directly into machines was obviously something you wanted to be able to do. It turned out that why were we able to do that nobody else did? Well, it really came back from my own background of epistemology and philosophy, ontology as somebody who studied philosophy early on, and then mixed with practical experience on Hubble and other space programs to try to analyze telemetry with the tools out there. So we took a very different path. But early on, I thought, well, this is a logical way. Surely someone else is doing that. And I would go to the AGI conferences to see nobody was doing anything. Everybody was doing shooting. Everybody was pursuing statistical approaches, artificial neural networks. In fact, at that, even in the 2000s, even as late as early 2000s, you go into an AI library, even before, and open a book of AI, it's all about statistics and Bayesian statistics. So that's pushing everybody, all the educational institutions, pushing everybody down the statistical thing, which ultimately culminated in an LLM, which, while they give it astonishing illusion of intelligence, are generally being recognized more and more that they're completely dumb. But next thing that came along was we went out and in 2014 filed a patent which described our approach. And believe it or not, we got, the patent office always comes in and says, what about this? What about that? They say, no, that's statistical. No, they have an algorithm. It's not what we're doing. We got that patent in about 2 years. And the big tech companies patent everything they do. So if there was some secret lab in Manchuria or someplace that is doing our approach, we have need no evidence that we've seen evidence that anywhere, any publication, anybody, once in a while you see something that they talk about knowledge or comprehension or models, but when you scratch the surface, they're still talking about mathematical models, they're talking about statistical models. They're not talking about knowledge models that come right curated directly from the human. So I've lost my nervousness about that. Now, moving on. Oh, by the way, if there is some secret lab, when they do come out, we'll sue them for violating our patent because they didn't patent it. So again, we are building a much more comprehensive patent fence, by the way. We're investing considerably right now. We expect to be filing a number of more patents that really build a fence around us, to make it really difficult for somebody. Because once we come out with that tipping point demo, or release the product, and Tim Cook can pick up his phone and somebody runs in his office, Tim, you got to look at this, just like they did with Siri originally. He's going to talk to the Sapience and he's going to go, uh-oh. So what happens then? Now they try to buy us. But, which is good problem to have, but my answer to Tim would be, this has been evaluated as the most valuable technology ever. Even Apple doesn't have enough money to buy it. So let's talk about a license. We'll license it to you. You can put a Sapience inside a Siri and it will understand what people want to say and brand it as an Apple product. And then, I think there's a real possibility of this that would happen. Apple has not rushed into LLMs. And people are criticizing them for it. They say, oh, they're behind in AI. Well, maybe they're ahead in AI because they're not going down the rat hole of LLMs. So we will license it to the big tech companies. We will have a strong patent fence to make sure that we'll give it to them on very favorable terms. But we do not want one big tech company owning this technology. It would be like Google owning the internet. I don't think that would be good for our society.
A question that is constantly coming up. Can we discuss near-term plans to roll out an initial commercial application?
Well, the first one we think we're going to, there's two possibilities here. The initial, we have the commercial side and we have the consumer side. Our notion of the first consumer side product is what we call the companion. And it is kind of like what Siri should have been. It's on your phone. You can tell it about, you can chat with it. You'll talk to it about your family and your dog and your cat and everything, because it'll be really novel that it knows about what those things mean, and it'll chat back with you. And, remember your, friends' birthdays, and you can tell it that this is a real close friend, but that friend, just an acquaintance and all that stuff. And then we'll build interfaces, of course, into the, to the contacts and the calendar and all that stuff. And it'll start to really be able to manage, not only did I take my medication, but get to the point down the road, not maybe on the very first product released, but eventually be able to read your emails and screen those for it, eventually screen your phone calls. Become a real personal assistant with a human level intelligence. That's a fantastic product. Why would you not want one of those for like $10 a month? And the market size of that is in the billions because they run natively on cell phones. Apple, I used to say Apple at first, and then Android, but it looks like they just came out with a new library with Swift UI on Java. It looks like we can port our Java version and Swift version over to Androids much sooner than we thought. So probably at practical release, we'll have billions and billions of potential customers. And it doesn't cost us a cent for them to operate it. It doesn't cost us a cent for data centers or computers because it runs on computers that other people own. The other side is commercial. We are already talking to potential customers there. That could happen anytime. I don't want to say when it's going to happen. A customer has to basically say from where we go today, if you would build one of these applications with Sapience with expert knowledge or interfaces into your bank or your drone or your medical application, your medical, we need significant funds there. We need about $2 million upfront or over time, guaranteed, to build an application like that. Now, with time, we'll start building out our own prototypes in these areas, and it'll be less. But we already got some serious interest in healthcare, and we have serious interest for automating drone applications. But again, the funding has to be there. So that could happen anytime. But the one thing that we think is in our control is a companion Sapience. When? It's so hard to say. I can come with estimates. But to me, with our expanded staff, when can we get to the tipping point? When can we get to commercial things? And when we get there, when we're all of a sudden profitable or have contracts or can demonstrate to anybody with a conversation like Tim Cook that, my gosh, our valuation, that is our share value, is going to explode. So again, this is a good time to get on board. When anything I say, you're going to hold me to. So I hate to say it. Could happen in 18 months or a year. Oh, don't forget I said that. But
As a last question.
It's not 10 years down the road. We're not talking about some far future. When we're talking about the time constants of what you might expect a return on an investor in a new technology.
As a last question, just before we wrap up, again, everyone, please put your questions in the chat before we end at the top of the hour, or you can email com@newsapiens.com. We'll answer all of your questions. We can't provide personal contacts per Reg CF compliance, but we can offer the company contact. So feel free, as lengthy a question as you would like. We always enjoy answering your questions. In terms of the Reg CF, what will be the valuation of New Sapiens in the next funding round? And what are we trying to accomplish? How much money are we trying to raise for this round?
Well, right now we're trying to get to $2.5 million. We got we did a former round, we got $2.5 million. But we're only allowed via regulations to raise $5 million a year. If we can achieve so we already collected $2.5 million in the last round, so we can only have space to $2.5 million. Will that get us to that tipping point, to that first product? It could. It possibly could. If not, next year we can do another $5 million. So we don't need $100 million or $200 million like you need to if you want to get serious about doing something with machine learning algorithms or AI. We can get there. I would love to go from we're now like at 20, a staff of about 20, and I'd like to go to 40 or 50 over the next year. And we can do that with the $2.5 million valuation. Oh, share value. At this round, it's $6 per share, which is up from $4. Valuation is, is kind of a dark art or voodoo thing. And if you read our Synthetic Intelligence 101 document, which you can request from the website, from the invest page, we have a little discussion about that. What do you evaluate? What could be the last tool humans will ever be at, or the most technology? We've been told. I was told years ago that if you can do this, it would be the most valuable technology ever. You can't put a value on it. This was from professional valuers that you can't do it, but we have to do it because we have to share out some price. So if you look at Ilya Sevesker, who came out of OpenAI and started this recent Safe AI company, he just raised the third round of Series C at a $34 billion valuation. He has no product. He has no technology. Well, the technology he's going to use is LLMs. Well, good luck with that, Ilya. Okay. And they say, we're only going to release a product when we can guarantee it's safe. Well, how are you going to guarantee an LLM is safe when you can't ever be sure it's going to come out with the right answer? And there's other problems with LLM. You can't ever get bias out of them because it was trained on things that human beings said, and human beings have bias. So you're never going to fix those problems. It's just not logically possible. Which the fact that people have bought all that says a lot of things. P.T. Barnum would have an explanation, but they've been some really good salesmen, and I should say snake oil salesmen out there. So yeah. But anyway, people are waking up. So our valuation is at this price is about $150 million. A lot for a company that doesn't have revenues and products compared, but this isn't, this isn't another kitchen gadget company. This is major.
Well, just before we wrap up, I do want to say thank you, everybody, for being here, for staying with us. I really had fun on this demo. You can go invest at investnow.newsapiens.com. That is investnow.newsapiens.com. We have extra documents as well. We weren't able to talk about them today, but we have new documents called Synthetic Intelligence 101 and the Company 101, which dives into all of the things about New Sapiens and the company in such detail that we wouldn't be able to spend an hour on this. It would be a full webinar.
It has the history of the company, how we got here, what our funding history has been, our challenges, our technical history, and then where we are today and where we hope to get in the next year, a year and a half. So it really is designed specifically, both of those things, New Sapiens 101, or rather Synthetic Intelligence 101, that's the technical stuff. That tells you how it works, why it's different. So this is everybody's AI company. This is the thoughtful, contemplative, intelligent person's AI company, and we are giving you the information with complete transparency you need to make a decision, dig as deep as you want. So I'd also like to thank you, and I'd also like to thank you for being such an attentive, quiet, and well-behaved audience. Of course, I have no idea if you were. I couldn't hear you or see you, but I assume you are, because that's the kind of people invest in New Sapiens. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have any questions, any comments, any feedback, or you want us to send you the recording, you can email us at com@newsapiens.com. We have a great team, great people behind there as well. And we'd be happy to share basically anything. We're a very transparent company, and we're a very contrarian company as well, because LLMs and OpenAI and all those companies are not transparent. We pride ourselves on being transparent.
Well, we're transparent because we're proud of what we've done. We have nothing to hide, and any setback and other things was kind of par for the course. So we have absolutely nothing to hide. We believe in our product. And we're contrarian, not because we're contrary people, but we just came up with something that happens to be the opposite of what everybody else does. So thank you.
All right, we got the 30-second warning. Again, everyone, visit investnow.newsapiens.com. The link is in the chat, or you can type it in your browser, com@newsapiens.com, to contact us. And we want to wish you a very happy rest of your week and happy weekend.
Help us save the world.